All right, welcome back to another episode of DD Geopolitics. I'm John, alongside Sarah, as always. And today we are joined by Dan Kovalik. Dan is an international human rights lawyer. He's also a labor lawyer based in the United States. Dan is also the author of The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. Our last conversation actually was about Palestine primarily, Dan, in your new book, which is fantastic. But the subject of the conversation today is going to be the crackdown by the United States on dissidents, on people who advocate for peace with America's supposed enemies. Dan was recently the latest subject of this crackdown after he was detained upon arriving from Venezuela here in the United States. You had your phone seized, your laptop seized, and you were detained for, what was it, like 4 hours? So maybe you can start off a little bit about telling us about your trip to Venezuela and the case of your detainment.
Yeah, so I flew, first of all, through Bolivia to Venezuela and back through Bolivia. So when I was coming into Miami, I flew from Bolivia directly and had been on a charter flight from Venezuela. So, if they knew I was in Venezuela, I don't know, they would have had to do some intelligence work, because I also hadn't posted about it. So that's just an interesting little sideline. But I was at the Anti-Fascist Congress in Venezuela, which was great. There were 1,200 international guests there from all over the world, every inhabited continent. And we were addressed by everyone, by Delcy, the vice president, by Maduro, the president, by the head of the House of Deputies. I mean, it was in the head of foreign affairs. So, and there were also panels and other speakers. It was a great event. Maduro gave the last talk. He spoke for about 2 hours, actually, and even sang a little bit, believe it or not. There was a band, and he sang along with it. It was pretty nice. It's a very moving thing. And just to say, my anecdotal, I've been to Venezuela many times over the years, maybe 20 times. The last time I was there, I would say, and that was a couple to a few years ago. I don't even remember how long. It seemed to me that there wasn't a lot of traffic. There wasn't a lot of, people in the streets. It seemed the problems with the economy were evident. That was different this time. There was a lot of traffic, a lot of people in the streets. It felt, again, my anecdotal observation is that the economy is coming back. By the way, so Maduro pointed out that when Trump put in the sanctions, the new sanctions, harder sanctions against Venezuela, I think in 2019, their economy was reduced by something like 90%. Their revenue went from something like, I think he said $50 billion, listen to this, to $700 million. I mean, that's amazing. He thinks they'll be up to $10 billion next year. So they even haven't recovered even to a fifth of what they were, but they've recovered quite a bit.
Yeah, I understand that things have really turned around in the last few years significantly, but people always forget about that context of the Trump administration and their posture against Venezuela when they talk about the migrant crisis that we're experiencing today, right?
Right.
So that seems like it's always stripped of context.
Yeah, no, well, and that's the thing. If you care, we could have a whole discussion, but I think we all agree, if you care about migration, stop destroying other people's countries, stop destroying their infrastructure, stop destroying their economies, stop overthrowing popular governments. I mean, right, that is the seed of all this mass migration. So, and again, when you destroy an economy like that, when you steal their single biggest source of revenue was Citgo, their U.S.-based oil company. The U.S. stole it and is now, I guess, it's certainly been greenlit to now sell it off in pieces. I don't know where that process is at, but they went to court and the court approved them to do that. So that's an incredible thing. That is war. That is warfare. Okay, that is war by other means, and that needs to be pointed out. But again, at least it does seem to be coming back. And by the way, I got a little inside information for you if you're interested, and that is next week it will be announced that Venezuela will become a full member of BRICS.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And they will have every member. I didn't know this. Every member has a certain task, and Venezuela's is going to be poverty reduction. Isn't that incredible? Beautiful thing. So then, and this is very interesting and relevant. So, as I said, we took a charter flight then back from Caracas to Bolivia. And what was really neat is, so the charter flight going, there was only delegates for the conference. The one going to Bolivia was full of delegates, but also about 30 Venezuelan firefighters who were going to fight the forest fires in Bolivia. And so that was really nice. I mean, to see that type of international solidarity from a country, again, that's struggling economically and all, and it's sending firefighters to help another country. And again, that's something just people need to hear about. That's, internationalist solidarity in action. So I got to Bolivia, then I flew to Miami. And when I got to Miami, I presented my passport, and after a few minutes, the person said, "Go stand over there," which I know what that means. But since I first went to Russia in November 2022, I'm stopped at customs for interrogation more often than not. So now it's becoming a bit routine. No, this was not a routine one. Mm-hmm. Up till now, I've been stopped for about 15 to 20 minutes. It's been friendly. They haven't looked at my bags. They haven't looked at my electronics. They've almost gone out of their way to be nice to me. And I'm very nice to them. I mean, I try to cooperate if they're going to be cooperative and get out of there. And that's always worked. It didn't work this time. So, because I think they were ready for me. I think, so they sat me down in the main office where everyone was sitting. So all the people being held over for they call it secondary questioning were in there, but they got everyone else was getting processed very quickly, coming in, coming out. I sat there maybe for an hour. And then a customs officer comes out, says, "Will you take your bags and come back here?" I was taking a room. She told me initially, she said, "You've been selected for a random search for drugs because a lot of people are bringing drugs from Bolivia. Want to check your bags. And I'll also ask you some questions, and then we'll get you out of here." Okay. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay. I mean, I did think to myself, what are the odds that a guy that's pulled over most of the time for political issues is also being randomly selected for a drug search? Okay. And of course, this was a ruse. Okay. There was no drug sniffing dog. She did go through all my bags. I would say, in terms of the thoroughness of it, I would say about 75%. Yeah, she kind of looked at everything. She didn't go through my prescription drug bottles, which aren't clear. I mean, they could have contained drugs. I could have had it in the coffee I brought back. The point is, if this were a true drug search, it was perfunctory, right? And then she said, "Oh, and by the way, we can also search your computer and your phone. And we're going to do that. But," she says, "we're only going to search for drug-related stuff. If you had texted someone that you had swallowed some drugs, or we're not going to rifle through your phone and your computer, and we're not even going to turn on the internet or Wi-Fi. We're just going to, go do a calculated search for drug stuff." Now, again, obviously, I'm clinging to hope, but it's bullshit. It's not what was happening, clearly. So she then brings me into another room. I had to fill out a form, which was basically name, rank, and serial number, nothing big. But then she starts questioning me, not about drugs, but about all my travels, about who do I meet with, who pays for my trips, what government officials do I meet with. Actually, this is the type of interrogation I've been getting now since going to Russia. So clearly, this has nothing to do with drugs. Clearly, this is about the usual stuff. And we had 2 rounds of questioning like that. It ended, I don't know if it ended because of this, but it ended at the point where she asked me, so what countries do you feel most threatened by when you go there and you're afraid to go there? I said, honestly, the one we're sitting in. Honestly, this one, you know, because I'm treated like this, like a criminal. And she said, okay, well, I don't take that personally. You know, I understand. She then, I had to go to the bathroom. I went back into the main hall. She brought me back and she said, I got some great news and some not so great news. Here's your computer back. We're going to let you leave. And, but we got to keep your phone because we haven't gotten to your phone. But here's a receipt for it. You'll get it back by noon. We're going to send it, ship it as quickly as possible. Get it back by noon. If you don't get it back by noon, here's a phone number. And so I left without my phone. And of course, which is a little different, you know, I couldn't get an Uber. You know, you think about all the things you use your phone for. Of course, I haven't gotten my phone back. It's now been 48 hours. I don't have it back. And by the way, she was supposed to call my son. I left a number of my son, who's 27, for her to call with a tracking number. She said, as soon as we have a tracking number, we'll call your son, give him the tracking number so you can track it. Well, he hasn't gotten a call either. So it's been 48 hours. So I just went out and bought a new phone. But the point is nothing she said to me was true. Okay, everything was lies. Okay. And of course, the law is the agent can lie to you, but you can't lie to them. It's illegal to lie to them. So that's pretty much the story, you know. So I got back Friday night. I got to my apartment about 3 a.m. And which is, you know, Friday night, Saturday morning officially. You know, and I've just been I've been 2 days without a phone. And of course, you know, I'll be honest, a bit worried about what the next steps are. I've had that phone for years, you know, it's an iPhone 11. I mean, it's ancient. My whole life's on there, you know, and obviously who wants people rifling through it? So I read, obviously I'm doing some Googling when this after this happens. And, you know, there's mainstream news stories on this. I learned that the customs, US Customs copies 10,000 phones a year. Copies the whole thing. Some randomly. They do some randomly, but most I assume is targeted. All 2,700. This is all 2,700 customs agents have access to that data. They can go on their lunch break and while they're eating their sandwich, rifle through your life. It's incredible. It's incredible that this is permitted. But it's a lesson. You know, the truth is, you know, obviously I'm kicking myself. I knew this could happen. I kept thinking about things I would do to kind of prepare for this, and I didn't do much to prepare for it.
Too many of the things you thought of.
Yeah, you know, and I'm a lawyer, and I listen to all these true crime shows. You know, I'm very, very schooled in everything I should have done, and I did none of it. So,
well, there's always that balance between being paranoid all the time and then just doing the things, right?
Well, and part of it was, you know, part of it is here's the problem, is that we're so dependent on these things. And so I thought I bought a new phone before I left to be my burner phone. You know, but the problem is, you know, I thought about it and I thought, you know, I have international calling things on my old phone. I have a lawsuit. I'm a lawyer. I have a lawsuit I'm involved in Seattle as a lawyer. We had some deadlines last week when I was in Venezuela. By the way, our local, not to disparage my local counsel, but he hadn't gotten some papers in that needed to be gotten in. So I had to contact him. Long and short of it is I did use that phone. And if I didn't have it, it would have been a problem. But that's the problem. We depend too much on these things. And so that's how they get you. They get you because you walk into the lion's den naked when you knew you should have brought your sword and your shield. And you know, it was too damn inconvenient for you. And, you know, let that be a lesson to everyone, to all you young people out there.
And a lot of people will ask, well, you know, how can they do this to you? You know, aren't you able to call a lawyer? People don't realize that before you go through customs, you have absolutely no rights, right? They can
no right.
It's possible.
That's right. You have no constitutional rights. And how it works is, now this is by law. It's not because of the Constitution, but the truth is you have no constitutional rights. I believe it was the Patriot Act that changed the law to say that you don't have any constitutional rights till you cross the border. And until you cross that border, till you go through those double doors in the airport, push them aside, and enter the main terminal, you are not in the United States of America. You are at the border. And they can look at all your stuff. They can hold you for up to 72 hours, maybe more if they want to. You don't get a right to a lawyer. They have the power of God over you, is the truth of it. And there's very little recourse that you have. So that's what, it's a very, whenever I go in there, again, I rarely get butterflies anymore, that nervous stomach before doing anything in my life, except often when I'm about to enter U.S. Customs. I know that it could go badly. And this is, for me, as badly as it's ever gone. So, and it's really wrong. I think it's so wrong that the Fourth Amendment, what it is the Fourth Amendment is suspended. Rights against illegal searches and seizures. That's suspended when you're in customs. And so you have these let's face it, these bureaucrats who have the power of God over you. And, it's not a pleasant situation. And this is all tied in, of course. This all relates to what's been announced these last 2 weeks. The Justice Department announcing it's putting sanctions on RT, saying no one can help them in any way, even, give them any services, which means, could be read to say you can't even go on the show. And then Blinken yesterday, Anthony Blinken said RT there is now considered by the U.S. to be an espionage organization. Nice. So if you work with them, you're a spy. You're now a spy. Okay. It's incredible. It's incredible what's happening. And also it has to be put in the context of we're about this close to a nuclear war with Russia. We're now deciding whether we're going to send long-range missiles to Ukraine to be used deep within Russian territory. And Putin said, just as Kennedy said in the analogous situation to Khrushchev, Putin is saying, you do that, and you hit us with a long-range missile, which, by the way, would have to be operated either by an American or a Brit, depending on whose missile it is. It could not be operated only by Ukrainians. So you'd have to have U.S. or British military personnel programming those missiles, operating them to some extent. And Putin's saying, you do that. You help fire those missiles deep inside our territory. We're going to retaliate, and not against Ukraine. We're going to retaliate against you, against the U.S., against Britain, against the West, which, again, is exactly what Kennedy told Khrushchev during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said, if Cuba launches a Soviet missile, by the way, not just against the U.S., he said, against any country in the hemisphere, we will treat it as a direct attack by the Soviet Union against the United States, and we will respond in kind against the Soviet Union. So Putin's saying nothing that Kennedy didn't say when he was faced with the same situation. Of course, back then, Kennedy and Khrushchev were still talking, and they negotiated a solution out of that in 13 days. Here, you've had this standoff in Ukraine, this proxy war by the West against Russia going on now for almost 2 years. 3 years, almost 3 years now. And Biden never talks to Putin. Never. And so, and of course, now let's face it, we do not have a commander-in-chief who is even capable of having a discussion with Putin. That's the scary thing. What I always tell people is, every president since World War II, as bad as they've been, and they've been pretty bad, some of them, all of them believed that one of their biggest duties was to prevent World War III. All of them did not want that. And even when their militaries were pushing for it, like the military brass were doing during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the president would stand firm and say, no, we got to ratchet this down. Even Reagan maybe even especially Reagan, for all his crimes in Central America and in Southern Africa, he was very cognizant of the dangers of nuclear war. He even wanted to get rid of all the nuclear weapons, and his CIA said he can't do it. But he took, he engaged in major arms negotiations, right? Arms reductions negotiations, as Dick Carter did.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that today we're seeing such an inverse of kind of what we've seen historically, where the politicians sometimes serve as a check on the military brass and leadership who want to escalate tensions. Today, if anything, it seems to be the opposite, where you have U.S. generals saying, well, think about the implications of long-term missiles being U.S. long-range missiles being sent into Ukraine, while it's the political apparatus that is chomping at the bit, a bipartisan group of senators, by the way, who is requesting immediate use of these long-range missiles by the Ukrainian government in this situation. And that I also have to point out, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists says that we're closer to nuclear war than ever. And it's like people aren't taking this seriously.
Yeah, and by the way, but the horrible part again is you're right. The brass and the intelligence are pushing for war, and it's the unelected officials like Blinken and Sullivan and others who are the ones pushing for war, and you do not have an elected official standing in the way. That's the difference. That is a historic difference, and it is scary. And no one seems to care. That's the other crazy part of all this, especially the liberals. They don't care. During the debate, it was very interesting that Trump actually at least raised the alarm that we're headed towards World War III. He said that a couple times. Kamala didn't even respond to it. She doesn't care. Presumably, as vice president in a White House whose president doesn't function, she might have some ability to stop all this, and she's doing nothing as far as we can tell. She's a complete tool, it seems to me. So that's where we're at. So what's happening to Danny Shaw, to Scott Ritter, to myself, to others, Sarah, I guess yourself. I mean, all of this has to be put in the context of the fact that we're being pushed into World War III. And whenever a war, especially of that magnitude, is being planned and pushed, they start going after dissidents big time, right? Because they need to shut down all debate that could slow down the war machine. And again, they said that. I mean, they said, Blinken said that RT's big crime is that he says, they've really hurt the Ukrainian war effort because they've, in his view, are putting out propaganda that is slowing, making Americans rethink the idea about supporting Ukraine. I don't see it as propaganda. I think it's just another viewpoint that needs to be heard. But of course, it's all bullshit because no one who watches RT. You can't watch it on TV anymore. It's not on cable anymore. YouTube banned it. You can watch some clips on Twitter. Otherwise, you really can't watch it in this country. So what influence do they have? None. I mean, so that's just all nonsense. I mean, it's just complete nonsense. But it's a pretext, and the pretext is designed to justify going after people like us that are trying, that are influencing the issue, that are questioning the Ukraine support and strategy. Twofold, by trying to silence us, get us censored, but also to cajole us into silence, right? They hope that people are saying, oh, God, Scott Ritter, man, the FBI invaded his home, and they took that guy's phone, and they took the other guy's phone, and maybe they're going to indict people. They're starting to indict people. They indicted the head of Rumble, for example.
Yep.
Maybe I got to be quiet and just lay low and say nothing. And that's what they want. That's what they want. And that's why all Americans should be concerned about this. This is bad. I mean, for all of us, if there's not alternative voices to say the emperor has no clothes and that this war is not a just war and it's not worth supporting, it's certainly not worth going to nuclear war over, So that's it. I guess I've spoken a long time, but that's my wrap. That's my wrap anyway. So.
What do you think about, like, we have journalists? Gosh, I'm really using that term loosely.
Yeah.
We have commentators, or influencers, what do we want to call them? And they're really allowed. I don't want to say they're allowed to say whatever they want, but they're saying some crazy, outlandish things. Historical revision, blatant racism and anti-Semitism, and even some could be sincere, as insightful language. What do you make of them kind of not really being harassed, other than by their their colleagues, I guess, and not by the authorities? Like it's people like you, myself, Scott Ritter,
Right.
Mr. Times. Why not these psychotic right wingers that are talking about Bolsheviks killing 100 million Christians? Why not them?
Yeah, because it doesn't challenge the main narrative they're trying to push. They don't care about that. They're trying to push a war with Russia, and that doesn't really impact that. They're also not going after almost every member of Congress who gets money from AIPAC. I mean, which is the biggest foreign influencer in the U.S. AIPAC is spending over $100 million on this election cycle. It's incredible. They don't care about that election interference, right? I mean, that I shouldn't put quotes around that. I meant to put around Russian election interference. AIPAC is real. And again, John F. Kennedy tried to make AIPAC subject to FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And then he was killed a little while after that. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. But the point is, it certainly legitimately could be subject to that, but it's not. Instead, they're going after people like us. Frankly, let's face it, in all modesty, we're pretty much small potatoes compared to AIPAC, certainly. In fact, I saw in the DOJ, in one of the indictments or their one of their announcements, they said that I forget whether it was RT or someone they were railing against for alleged propaganda. They said they have gotten a total of 16 million hits. Like 16 million? First of all, there's about 350 million people in the U.S. And if those 16 million hits on their site are not unique hits, right? As we know, it could be, the same people hitting it. 16 million is nothing. It's nothing over a long period of time. It's not influencing anybody.
Yeah. I mean, some of these influencers out here will get 100 million impressions, like on a single post, right?
One post, and this is in toto. This is in total 16 million hits, and I don't think they said the time period, but it was like a significant time period. It's nothing. So, we live in an Orwellian world, where double standards reign, and free speech is only free for some people and not for others. And again, the thing I worry about is the people who used to care about this don't care about this anymore. The liberals used to care about free speech. They don't care. They don't care. In fact, they're more than happy to see certain people censored. There's the
same people who were arguing against the war in Iraq, right? In some cases, at least.
Yeah.
But the irony about this that I just want to touch on again, and you've raised it, is that a lot of these laws that were put in place in the aftermath of 9/11, supposedly to address terrorism, the Patriot Act, and so on, were used as a pretext, right, to keep the country safe. But what is actually happening at this very moment? Well, these laws are being used in order to target the advocates for peace. Like, how backwards, into your words, Orwellian is that?
Well, peace has always been a verboten subject in the United States. Eugene V. Debs was jailed for opposing World War I, right? The McCarthy period went after a lot of people who were advocating for peace with the Soviet Union. That's always been a no-no. Because the U.S., they used to say the business of the U.S. is business, but now the business of the U.S. is war. And it's bad for business for people to argue for peace. And so, yeah, those are the people they worry about the most. And also, of course, the student protesters who are protesting against the war in Gaza. They are also considered to be, a threat to the system. And again, this should be of grave concern to everybody. I mean, because literally all of humanity is threatened by this possible, outbreak of World War III. I mean, we're already in World War III, but it's a low intensity war in truth. But, we're talking about World War III on the level of World War II and World War I. But this time, not just with a couple nuclear weapons like were used at the end of World War II, but, a massive use of nuclear weapons could happen. So that's what's at stake. And that's what's at stake for the work that we do, for the three of us here. I mean, that's why we do what we do. We want to stop that. And we say that, Russia's not our enemy. And again, those are fighting words. Those are not things you should say in polite company.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get to a little bit to how this might reflect to the insecurity of the United States at this moment, because what I see is one of the key differences between now and possibly in eras past is that now you have a global situation that has vastly changed. I mean, you mentioned at the top that Venezuela is going to join BRICS, and for folks on this who are watching that might not understand the full implications, I know we have a very literate audience, so most people do know that Venezuela is the most oil-rich country in the world. But this is a massive addition to a new economic bloc that's forming. Of course, the U.S., compared to at the beginning of the Cold War, accounted for nearly 50% of the global economy. Today, it's a significantly smaller proportion of that, while nations like China, India, Iran, Russia all make up a larger proportion than they did 2 decades ago. And so I think all of this is colored also by a fundamental weakness, not only in terms of the overall economy, but also internal political instability, where you have more and more people than ever who don't trust the institutions, who don't trust either of the major political parties. And so I think this whole constellation of international geopolitical affairs where the United States is situated and its own inability to reconcile with its own economic and social problems all lays a groundwork for a very, both at the same time, dangerous and also kind of incompetent response. So I know that might seem a little contradictory, but that's kind of the way I see it. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, no, what is happening, by the way, I'm losing light, as you can see.
We're in a competition. It's okay.
Yeah, hold on. Let's see if that helps a little. I was relying on natural sunlight, but it's getting dark. I don't know. Did that help? Probably not. A little.
You just look more mysterious.
I look mysterious. Okay, that's not
like somebody who just got detained by DHS.
Yeah, exactly. Who should be detained and under a bright light. So yeah, I mean, all this push to war is about the U.S.'s declining empire, right? It cannot compete anymore economically, particularly with China. It just can't, or technologically. It can't compete with Russia to some extent as well, although Russia's economy is very small, but still they see them as a potential competitor as well. Unable to compete, losing diplomatic prestige by the day, all they have left is military force. That's it. And what is happening is there are people in the ruling class who have a lot of influence who have decided the only way for the U.S. to maintain its dominance is through war, particularly against Russia and China. And that is what we're moving towards. And the press is helping with that every day. This idea for just one this idea that the U.S. cares about Taiwan is absurd, right? I mean, it's just a total ruse to anyone who pays attention to anything. The idea that the U.S. is defending something other than its own interest in Taiwan is a joke. It's not defending anything. It's all about trying to stir up a conflict that can be a pretext for the U.S. to fight China. Just as defending Ukraine is a pretext for fighting Russia. When the U.S. hasn't defended them at all, Ukraine will be destroyed after this. The U.S. doesn't care. You had Lindsey Graham last week appear with Zelensky, and he made Zelensky look like a fool. He thanked Zelensky's for sending Ukrainian troops to fight Russia so that we didn't have to. They're just cannon fodder for us. And so, but that's what this is about. And it is about maintaining hegemony through violence because they don't see any way around it.
Do you think that these harassments and these episodes aren't really like there's not a whole ton of substance? I'm not talking about the indictments with the monies and all that. I'm talking about the you and Scott's and all of those, that they're just more about just scaring you enough to just be like, you know what, I got to take a break. Like, I better give it a rest for a little bit. Or do you think that they're actually looking for something?
That's a great question. I'd like to believe that it's just to scare me, obviously. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on how far we keep pushing it. I mean, I really do. I do think that if we're quiet, maybe they will just back off. But they may feel they have to indict one of us to set an example, at some point. I don't know, but I have my fears, that it's more serious than just putting fear into people. In any ways, these sorts of things have their own logic. Once the government kind of starts a process against someone, once the government has someone in their sights, it's not good, right? I mean, there's kind of a acceleration towards something. So it certainly is minimally to cajole people into silence, but if that doesn't work, are they willing to pull the trigger? Sure. I mean, look at I'm not going to pronounce it right. The Aruru case.
The Aruru 3. Yeah.
Aruru 3. They did indict them, and they did convict them at least of conspiracy. So, that's an example of they're willing to pull the trigger if they need to. Now, what lessons they draw from that case? They didn't convict them of the Foreign Agent Registration Act claim, so it was a partial victory for the defendants in that case. And they went after very low-hanging fruit. Let's face it, they went after a group none of us had heard of until they were indicted. And that's on purpose. They want a test case. They don't want to go after a Scott Ritter first. He's very well known. Mm-hmm. It would be very controversial. China, Russia, every country, all of our adversaries would totally make hay about it. Like, look at your democracy and your free, right? I mean, they don't want to have to do that. So they're going to go after the small guys first and hope that, again, that'll intimidate everyone else. And I consider myself a small guy. I mean, I am, honestly, I feel like I'm a nobody is the truth of it. I mean,
you have imposter syndrome, Dan. You're not.
Maybe. So, that's what makes me afraid. I mean, I don't have, I feel a little out there, on a limb. On the other hand, again, I think when you do this work, you have to accept consequences. I mean, you don't like those. You don't have to like the consequences, but you have to face them and know that it's part of what we do. And we all knew that this could happen. And again, now that some dominoes are starting to fall, when we start seeing more of our friends have this happen to them, we know it could happen to us. I mean, you'd be foolish not to think that. So, that's how it goes. I don't know. I'm 56 years old. I'm honestly glad to be a little older. I've lived a lot of my life. My sons are in their 20s. They're doing well, knock on wood. So I don't know. Maybe I'm in a position to be able to handle a blow better than the younger people who have a future ahead of them.
That's kind of how I feel. Like after mine, it was like I don't really have a ton left to lose at this point. But I also think that imposter syndrome is like, and I hope you get over it because I think it can be incredibly dangerous. There's been a couple times recently where like something has happened, and I've said I think that we forget like how big we are. We're bigger targets than we think we are.
Right. Well, and that may be true. And again, I'd like to think I have some influence in the world, or else why am I doing what I'm doing? We do what we do to change people's minds. I mean, that's what activists do. So, and of course, let's look at the bright side. Someone said something very nice. Thank you, Hassan. Really appreciate it. Believe me, I need to hear this stuff. I really have very low self-esteem. So anyway, the bright side is the more they repress you, and the more that is evident to people, the more influential you are, right? You got to take the blows sometimes, because they will turn a nothing into a something by trying to repress it, right? That is the danger the government has in trying to repress speech, is often they then shine a light on it. And so we need to turn lemons into lemonade. When we go through something like this, we cannot shy away from it. I cannot say, oh, they took my phone, I guess I better hide. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not. That would be betraying my cause. It would be, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Very nice comments coming through. I'm very grateful for that. It would be betraying myself if I did that, So we are the righteous ones. We are on the side of goodness, okay? We are on the side of peace. We are on the side of decency. And those who are trying to fight us are indecent and inhumane. And we just need to keep that in our sights. That won't save us necessarily from the worst happening to us. But you know what? Whatever does happen to us will allow us to at least have peace with ourselves, to sleep at night, to know we did our best against great odds. And that gives me some comfort, And we have each other. That's the other thing. We do have each other. I've gotten a lot of messages of support from people, particularly people like you who do the same kind of work, who I think feel empathy because they know that, right, they're next, or maybe they've already been there.
We're there.
They've already been there. So, there's something biblical about it. I was raised Roman Catholic, so I've read the Bible, and in fact, my name Daniel, I was named after Daniel in the lion's den. You have to face those lions,
This is your fate.
It's my fate. It is right. It is. So, in my bright moments, I can, take some solace in it. Obviously, I have my dark moments, and I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. There's moments of panic and fear, but you get through those. And look, we also have to know other people have been there before. Mm-hmm. The Paul Robesons of the world. Now, Paul Robeson's life was destroyed by the McCarthy period. It was. I mean, I know people who knew him, and he died a very sad man because his career was destroyed. And it ain't necessarily a rose garden that we're going to be traversing through. But also, you think about the people in Gaza. Think about what they're going through. They don't have any food. They don't have any water. I mean, what we're going through is nothing like that, So you have to take courage and just do the right thing. Do what you believe in. That I guess that's my message. I hope I wasn't too corny.
No.
I sound
like kind of the thing that people need to hear right now. Go ahead, John.
Very well put. Yeah, and the spiritual piece was very, very well put and beautiful. And thank you for that, Dan. But I think even beyond the moral standing that we have at this moment is that we're also building in all of this. I really do see a nascent political movement beginning to emerge. I mean, I just think about the audience here at DD Geopolitics. It's like it's not a monolith, right? We don't fit squarely into one space ideologically. You look at the recent examples, folks like Scott Ritter. He used to be a Reagan Republican, and then of course you have people from the traditional left who are seeing the hypocrisy and lies between the conflict in Ukraine and then the war in Gaza. And so I think that you have more people that are and this is the danger that I believe that some of our intelligence agencies, our financial institutions and media monopolies see, is that the conditions themselves are bringing people together in this sort of way.
Yes.
And if we have the courage to kind of stick our necks out together and come together and support each other and not trifle over these silly issues or types of minute identity politics that can rip us apart, then we have a real opportunity to build a groundswell. And, you know, it's like, and even if it doesn't seem like we're on the precipice of that right now, I think that we could be a lot closer to it than we think we are, because, you know, fires don't start just gradually. A spark can be lit and things can gain a life of their own. So I just wanted to add that other note of optimism.
No, it's great. And you never know what that spark's going to be. You can't predict that. And so you just need to keep doing the work, and maybe you will be the spark, you know? So, and, you know, again, I travel all around the world and I just meet amazingly wonderful people. I'll just give one example. So I was at this Anti-Fascist conference, and there's this woman who's there. Every time I go to Venezuela, I see her there. She's from El Salvador. Okay. And if you saw her, I would just say you'd see this older woman with a cane, who you would kind of frumpy. Again, I'm just going to, you know, someone you would usually ignore. I'm sorry. She would pass your vision and you would just in and out and you wouldn't pay attention. Well, I found out some time ago she was a guerrilla fighter for the FMLN in El Salvador. And here she is, she can barely walk, and she goes to all these conferences, you know, travels around. She had to fly to Bolivia too, I think stay like 24 hours. We all had to sleep in the airport for like a whole night to wait for our plane. She did too. There are a lot of other older folks there, older than me, some in wheelchairs, slept in a wheelchair overnight. These are incredible people. Again, this woman from El Salvador, she was in the freaking mountains in the 80s fighting the death squads. Okay. Those are heroes. And there are a lot of heroes out there that we need to honor and that we need to be like, you know, that is a life worth living. And that's all you can do is live a life worth living, regardless of the consequences, you know? So, again, when on these travels, I just meet the most beautiful people who have fought battles I've never fought, you know? So take heart. That's the main thing, you know, and you have to be a joyful warrior. I try. I can't be all the time. I mean, I'm not insane, but, you know, you do it because also you enjoy it, and you have, you know, and a lot of the enjoyment comes from the relationships you make along the way. So I guess I've become very philosophical in this conversation, but I have to be, because you know, the reality is tough sometimes, and you have to kind of step back and say, well, but there's a bigger picture here, and that's what we're fighting for. So
when we started on Venezuela, and I don't know, maybe we end there too, because you'd mentioned the conference and some of the notable takeaways. I know that President Maduro had mentioned at a couple of junctures that the efforts to try to coup the Maduro government was itself had a number of fascist characteristics, right?
yes.
And so you're in this conference and you're with a lot of, you know, presumably like-minded people, and I just kind of want to get maybe a little bit more on that and how that ties into the fascism, of course, that we're seeing in the United States, and also apparently trying to export into countries like Venezuela.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say there. First of all, it was pointed out by a number of the speakers that after the recent elections, the right wing killed 27 Chavistas, assassinated them, and most low ranking. I mean, just people on the streets. Some in very brutal ways, shooting people's faces off, and a woman who was brutally murdered, a Chavista, her family was there. Maduro, she went up there. The family went up the stage. Maduro hugged them. I mean, again, you don't hear that in the news, right? You don't hear about the right wing violence like that. It has to be pointed out that the opposition candidate who ran against Maduro was going back to my friend who fought for the FMLN. He was in the embassy, the Venezuelan embassy in San Salvador during the 80s. And that office, you know the story that a lot of the death squad activity was run through the Venezuelan embassy. This was pre-Chavez, and that candidate back then who was in the embassy was part of that. He was part of supporting those death squads that, amongst other things, killed 75,000 people in El Salvador, killed Archbishop Oscar Romero, Saint Romero, I should say. He's been a saint, declared a saint by this Pope, Pope Francis. So when we talk about fascism, that's very, very real, in the case of these characters we're talking about, these right-wing characters in Venezuela. And in the last day or so, there was, Venezuela's released new evidence of an assassination plot against Maduro, which included at least one American military guy, but 3 Americans, but at least one. The U.S. has claimed one of them to be a military guy, which, by the way, almost proves Maduro's claim, because what the hell's an American military guy doing in Venezuela? I mean, except for doing something bad. I mean, so and those are the kind of examples they gave. And of course, the other one we have to really point out, and again, the height of irony, is Israel. I mean, it is full-on fascist now. It is full-on Nazi. I would not have said that before October 7th. I would have never equated Israel with Nazism. I would never have done that. I wouldn't have said that Israel was engaged in the final solution like Hitler was. But I'm sorry, that is exactly what's happening. We're at that point. And of course, we know about the Nazis in Ukraine. And I call them Nazis. The former president of Uruguay, who they called the poorest president in the world, he lived in a hut, Jose Mujica, Pepe, they called him. He said, you can't call the neo-Nazis in Ukraine neo-Nazis. They're just straight up Nazis. Right? They date themselves back to the 1920s. I mean, there's nothing new about them. There's nothing neo about them. They're just plain Nazis. So, I mean, this is real. Fascism, Nazism is real. And the U.S. is supporting it, just like it did, especially right after World War II with Operation Paperclip. If people don't know about that, look it up, Operation Paperclip. The U.S., I met some nice Greek folks there in Venezuela who talked about, of course, that the U.S. and Great Britain reinstalled fascism in Greece after the war. We're not just using the word fascism lightly, And again, I think that there are fascist, at least aspects. I don't want to say the U.S. is full on fascist, but there are fascist aspects to what the U.S. government is doing right now to dissidents like us. I mean, again, the problem is there's very few people speaking out against it. And that is the problem. Yes, Sarah.
To take us to the end, we have journalists out and traveling right now. Jackson's in Russia. We have other people in different volatile areas. I think Syrian girl just got back from Russia. Thankfully, she got home okay. What kind of advice do you have? Should we keep on doing what we're doing? Should we just stay where we're at? I know some people that are like, I'm not coming back. I'm just going to stay here until the election. So what advice do you have, and what hope is there on if the election ends up on either side?
Yes. Well, again, one of my favorite quotes is a ship is always safe in the harbor, but that's not what a ship is for. So I would be reticent to tell people to stay at home, people whose lives, revolve around travel, like international journalists of the type you mentioned. What I would say is take precautions. I would say don't bring your computer. If you really want to be careful, don't bring any phone and get a burner phone when you get to that country. Or bring a secondary phone that has nothing on it that you're going to use to text people, call your mom, and you should do that every day if your mom's still alive. But don't bring your primary phone with all your stuff on it, which I did, by the way. Again, don't, do as I say, not as I do. But I think that's important because, look, there's not, aside from taking your phone and your computer, there's not much they can do to you. Yes, they can hold you for 72 hours. They're not going to do that. They might hold you for 5 hours. They might hold you overnight. And that sucks. But they're not, that's it. That's all they can do to you. If you don't have those things with you, there's very little they can get from you. You don't have to answer their questions. And by the way, the other thing is you don't have to give them your password if you don't want to. I mean, they can't make you do that. Again, they will try to coerce you into doing that. But so if you have that primary phone or computer, have it password protected and don't tell them what it is. Again, you may have to endure some real inconvenience, but stand your ground. That is my advice to people. I would be reticent to say stop traveling. It's our right to travel. We have a constitutional right to travel. We have a constitutional right to return to our own country. We have international law rights to do that. So I'm encouraging people to do it, but be careful. That's it. Be careful. That's all. The precautions I mentioned, I think, are probably sufficient.
Well, Dan, I really, really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this. We try to get whoever's been detained the most recently, not for clicks, but because we're watching these grifters sort of get accolades and like all over the place, and we have our journalists that are out there and they're being detained or harassed or bothered at home and devices taken, and it's so important to make sure that like light is shed on to these literal truth tellers while the crazies are off doing their crypto scams or whatever it is that they do. So thank you so much for coming on. And what have you got coming up? I hope it's not any more travel. Maybe write a book about the traveling and
we'll see. I don't have a book. Can I just mention again
mention again, and we'll put a link in the description. It's so good.
If you want to support me, get my new book, The Case for Palestine.
So good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. In terms of trips, I may have some coming up. We'll see. I mean, I have to kind of think about that. I'm working on a big case out in Seattle that was brought against the Palestine Chronicle, trying to shut it down, trying to shut down its journalism. So that's on my plate. And I continue protesting for Gaza and against the war with Russia. So always, eternally, those are my things right now. So, and I just want to thank you, Sarah, and thank you, John, for having me on the show. I'm very grateful to comrades like you. You keep me going. Thank you.
Well, always. Well, thank you guys, and thank you for joining us. Please follow Dan. Please buy the book, and when you're done with it, buy it for another person who doesn't know that much about Palestine, Israel. It is such a good get into what's happening right now in Israel legally. Dan, again, thank you, guys. Follow Dan, and big show on Tuesday. We have finally Rybar's first English speaking show. We've got it. So we will see you guys. Thank you, Dan. We will see you on Tuesday. And Dan, let us know when you get your phone back. Thanks, everybody, and have the good rest of your Sunday. Enjoy the football game. Everyone.
Enjoy Sunday Night Football. I still love football. All right.
Go Steelers.
Okay. Hey, go Steelers. All right. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.